Yay. Oh, Emily, Baltimore. That's my heart home. I'm autistic, so I love my numbers. And so I am a huge Cal Ripken fan because he has the record for the most consecutive games played in Major League Baseball. I love Baltimore. I lived near there for a while. Yay, New York City, Julie, Phoenix. Oh, Jackie from Oceanside, California, Gloucester in the UK. Hi, Allison. We have a Gloucester in Massachusetts, and so that's now how I know how to say Gloucester. And Worcester. Ben from Denver. Hey, Mary Beth from Kentucky. Kentucky is beautiful. I drove from Connecticut to Kentucky once. First of all, the mountains of West Virginia are wild for driving. And second of all, Kentucky is beautiful, beautiful. So I am just making sure we have a couple of people joining. Once I go into presentation mode, I'm not going to be able to see people who join. So I'm trying to give everybody an opportunity to come on in. Okay. But it's 6:02, so probably around 6:03 and 30 seconds, I will go ahead and get started. I am really glad that everybody is here. I believe everybody has their mic muted, but please, if you do need to interrupt me, feel free to do so. Those of you who do not know, I am also deaf. So if you need to interrupt me verbally, that is okay. And I have the closed captions for myself. And also I turn the volume to max. So often I'm able to hear questions, but if you would be so kind, even if you want to verbally ask your question, I may have you also put it in the chat. And that would be just an accommodation request from me. We're going to go ahead and get started because it is 6:03. I'm not sure if it's 6:03 and 30 seconds. Oh, we have another friend coming. Yay. Okay. I think we're all in mute. And then, yeah. Cool. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started now that I believe many of us are here. I know a lot of people watch the recording. So first of all, if you're here, thank you so much for coming. If you are watching the recording, I also appreciate you being a part of this space and contributing to autistic culture and our understanding of autistic culture. I am going to share my screen and get going. Let me go to slideshow. Let me push this back up here, please. Oh no, I moved my little bar thing. That's all right. All right. So everybody, welcome to my presentation, Free the Stim, and we are going to be focusing on the occupation of stimming. My name is Sarah Salvaggi Hernandez. I am an occupational therapist, and I am also multiply disabled, including autistic and deaf. Who am I? That is me. I got a fresh haircut today, so it's looking quite like that picture. But some roles that are really important to me include being a mother, a partner, a daughter, a friend. I also really value being an educator. I was professor in Massachusetts for 5 years. And my new fun fancy thing I do is, well, I did was I became an author. I wrote with my partner from OT school. We wrote a children's book together actually while we were in OT school about a decade ago, and we published it. It's called Melt Like Ice Cream, and I really like it. Some advocacy identities, things that I tend to talk about openly and a lot because I truly believe that representation matters. But I talk about being queer. I am non-binary. My pronouns are she, they. I am autistic, and I am also deaf. Some personal identities is I think it's important to know culturally where I come from. I am a deep woods Maine girl. So up in the Northeast, all the way up in the tippity top Northeast section of the United States. I am fourth generation Penobscot. Oh, we have someone coming in. Admit. I'm fourth generation Penobscot, which is a tribe that is indigenous to the northern Maine, northeast Maine, southeast corner of Canada. And then also second plus generation of European immigrant. So three of my grandparents were immigrants from Italy and from England, and I am currently a steward of Podunk land in Connecticut. The Podunk tribe is a tribe local to Enfield and East Windsor, Connecticut, and I take my stewardship very seriously. So make sure that you know who you are, where you are, and who you should be giving respect to as far as the land which we are living on. Because if you are in the United States, we are living on stolen land. My mission in life, full out, is to provide sensory. As an autistic person and as a deaf person, sensory is the way and the truth for me. It is one of the most important things that I can talk about. If you are an occupational therapist here, you know that, like for me, when I was in school 10 plus years ago, sensory was seen as something to almost laugh at. And so I look at the advancements that we've made in advocacy for sensory, and I am humbled to be a part of this profession, and I thank you all for being here. My vision remains centered on the creation of identity affirming context. I am very, very dedicated to supporting equity and access to neurodivergent development. So that's fancy, but what does that mean? Essentially, I really believe that neurodivergent people, including autistic people, have the right to their own developmental trajectory. And if we are in any profession, including occupational therapy, and we are supporting autistic individuals, we really need to give them access to opportunities to develop as they should develop. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that tonight when we talk about stimming. My fun fact is that I was the first openly autistic person elected to government in the United States. I was elected locally to my Board of Education, and I am still, this was back in 2017, but I am still actively involved because I am at the very end, thank you goodness, of an ADA lawsuit to protect equity and access to accommodations for elected officials. But that's almost done, so hooray. That's me some agreements for tonight. Moving forward, some of the things that you will hear me say tonight, some of you are here from the autistic community. I welcome you. Thank you so much. And when I am talking about autistic culture and identity, these are going to be concepts that are familiar to you. Those of you who are from the therapist world, the therapy world, may not have had the opportunity to be introduced to these concepts. So in school, we were also often taught person first, So if we were talking about somebody who had been diagnosed with autism, we would say, like me, Sarah, diagnosed with autism. But as the community and culture of autism, being autistic has developed, the autistic community itself vastly prefers identity first language. So that is what I use. However, if you are somebody who gets here and you identify differently, person first, or if you have someone in your life who you love or are supporting, and they prefer person first, awesome. Like I would never, and I'm not about defining how other people identify themselves, but here tonight, you will hear identity first. The ways that I'm going to speak about autism are largely neurodiversity affirming. The reason why I do this is that there is in no way, shape, or form, there's no wrong way to be a neurodivergent person. And we need that affirmed to us because of the way that society pathologizes our existence. So tonight I am going to be speaking about mostly positive things. That does not negate the fact that in our community and with our diagnosis, there are barriers, but we really know those barriers, and we need to expand the conversation to include all of what neurodiversity is and affirm a holistic view of neurodiversity. Tonight, we will also be talking about different support needs. Sometimes in the literature or in the field, you will hear this referred to as functioning levels. Somebody can be high functioning or low functioning. And the autistic community does not find that helpful. Many people don't, because it doesn't adequately communicate what the person's needs are. So if somebody needs support with ADLs or going to the bathroom or eating or sleeping, or communication, focusing on exactly what somebody needs is more effective. People who are identified as being low functioning often have they're being questioned as far as competency. They're seen to be incompetent. They are talked for. They have made decisions made for them. So saying low functioning is often used to really deny competency, when saying somebody is high functioning is oftentimes denying that person access to support needs. So just getting rid of those labeling terms. Obviously, community gratitude. I learned what I learned about autism in occupational therapy school. We have a friend coming. Admit. In school, I learned from media. I learned from, Autism Speaks. And I really thank the autistic community for enlightening me and guiding me down this path and giving me so much wisdom. And I appreciate all of you here who are coming to listen to the autistic community. And I hope that I do a really good job of representing community interests. So this talk is for occupational therapists, but I'm going to do my best job to make it inclusive. So if you are a mother, a brother, an uncle, a gunkle, if you are a godparent, if you are any other type of therapist, you are welcome here. And know that the way that you speak to and about an autistic child has a profound impact on the development of positive disability identity, now and for the rest of their lives. You entered into this field to make a positive difference, and you're doing it. Check your bias, keep up to date on cultural research, and censor disabled voices. And remember, your job is amazing. If you are here in any capacity as an occupational practitioner, I want everyone, like, that is the coolest thing in the whole entire world, to really be the person that somebody can come to for support and for affirmation and for ways to help engage in the things that are important to them. So for some of you who are not maybe familiar with occupation, I thought I'd toss some terms in. AOTA, which is the governing body of occupational therapists and occupational therapy assistants in the United States, has defined occupation as being something that is an everyday personalized activities that people do as individuals, in families, and with community to occupy time and bring meaning and purpose to life. So all the things, all the activities that we do on our own together and with our communities to bring meaning and purpose to life. The World Federation of Occupational Therapy has the very same definition, and also includes that occupations are things that people need to do, want to do, and are expected to do. And then digging even deeper into occupation is the realm of occupational science. And occupational science is the study of occupation, and it highlights that occupation has 4 essential components, including doing, being, belonging, and becoming. So when we are talking about occupation, it's important that we specify that when we are talking about autistic people or otherwise neurodivergent people, we need to understand that autistic people have their own occupations that are not going to be shared with a neurotypical or neuronormative developing population. And so let's root in that first, that our understanding of occupation currently is really centered on neuronormative, heteronormative, and frankly, European normative standards of, oh my goodness, the words just flew away in my head. It's focused on those standards. AOTA, our governing body here in the United States, has set forward a vision for 2025, which, if you can believe it, next month is 2023. I'm scheduling things for February, March, and April, and that's wild. So we're almost there, but by 2025, AOTA really hopes that as an inclusive profession, occupational therapy will maximize health, well-being, and quality of life for all people, populations, and communities through effective solutions that facilitate participation in everyday living. So if you are somebody who is an occupational practitioner, we're not just looking at the doing, the thing that people are engaging with, but we're looking at the whole picture, the context, the community, the environment, the things around us and inside of us that help to maximize our health and well-being. It's important when we center this vision that we also bring in a lens of cultural humility. What is cultural humility? When you were in school, you likely heard this as cultural competence. And what has happened and what we've noticed through the decades that people have been selecting cultural competence as a target for their work is that people assume that you can meet competency, and competency is a moving target. We are always evolving in our understanding. The context around us are changing, the environments are changing, and the ways that different cultures and populations interact with contexts and environments around them is going to be impacted by culture. And so we as practitioners come in with a promise that we are here to learn, that we have gone to school and we know a lot about occupation, engagement, the skills needed to engage, supports needed to engage. And we are there to bring that skill set to the individual and their culture and help to synthesize the two together. An occupational therapist should not ever be just simply telling an individual what to do, how to do it. without really understanding who that person is and doing an occupational profile to understand cultural and other societal influences that may be important in the ways that they engage. So taking that practice of cultural humility and knowing you are never done with the work. It is important to know, as I am sitting here in front of you, you really need to consider the safety of all cultural intersections with autism, including the BIPOC perspective. This is amazing that we are all here gathered tonight, but I am clearly a white therapist, and I am coming with a very colonized and white perspective of autism. Many of those perspectives have changed specifically because of the guidance of BIPOC autistic advocates. But some of the things that we're talking about tonight, as we are talking about ways to change the paradigm, it is also important to talk about concerns, especially safety concerns, with marginalized populations. I think oftentimes when feedback from specifically Black autistic self-advocates that I've heard is that stimming and moving and of the many of the autistic ways of being, they're absolutely not wrong and they're absolutely not safe. And so our work cannot simply be focused on occupation. It also needs to be focused on changing the paradigms and changing the ways that our society views stimming. That's what we're here to do tonight, but I just really want to reinforce that this is something, again, that it may not be safe for all people to do. So when we're talking about autism, we know the DSM version of autism. The DSM version of autism focuses on deficits in social communication, verbal and nonverbal, reciprocal language, body language, eye contact, the things that we don't do well in those areas. The DSM also focuses on deficits in social behavior, in an autistic person's perceived difficulty in developing and maintaining friendships. And the DSM also lists restricted interest in repetitive behaviors, and focuses on, which is repetitive motor movements, insistence on sameness, restricted interest, and sensory sensitivities. Now, me, knowing who I am, I see stimming in all of these as an important part of all of these criteria, including communication, behavior, and sensory. So if we could take the DSM-5 and really switch it to more neurodiversity affirming language, I really like the way that Meg Proctor talks about autism and Learn, Play, Thrive Autism, but really looking at social and communication differences versus, and I'm going to pop back, deficits in social communication, talking about social and communication differences, social preferences, talking about double empathy, which we will talk about a little bit more, and expressive communication. Not deficits, they're just differences. Also talking about sensory processing differences. We're not going to talk about sensory processing in this lecture, but it is critical to understand about sensory thresholds, sensory strategies, sensory dysregulation if you are working with autistic populations. And sensory processing differences are a feature of the autism diagnosis. Another thing that more neurodiversity informing approach to identifying autism would include would be learning profile differences, differences in executive functioning, implicit learning, receptive language. All of these things are going to impact the way that we understand ourselves and the world around us and what's expected of us moving forward, and how those expectations have had an impact on our past. It's so much. But this, going back, this again is the diagnosis of autism. People can go to there's many different pathways of pursuing the diagnosis, but what's important to understand is the diagnosis of autism is not all of what is included in being autistic. The importance of knowing that there is a difference between the diagnosis of autism and the cultural experience of being autistic is crucial for really supporting your clients or the people around you in long-term development. A lot of times when people think about a diagnosis, they think about childhood, they focus on younger people who are diagnosed, and the lifespan development often does not come into consideration with an autism diagnosis. Autistic culture is really expanding that to include the entire lifespan and ways that we prefer to engage with each other. Some of the terms that I want to highlight, so autistic culture is underneath the umbrella of neurodiversity. Neurodiversity was a term that was coined by Judith Singer first in 1990, and then again in 2020. And neurodiversity means all minds, all the brains, everybody is included. The term neurodiversity is really a social and political term that suggests that within neurodiversity, everybody has a brain and everybody deserves support for the ways that their brain needs for engagement and function. In 1994, Cassiana Samasu came up with the term neurodivergent, which means diverging from neuronormative expectations. Neurodivergent people include those who are autistic, but it is also another really broad term that includes people with mental illness, epilepsy, Tourette's, CP, anything, all of the things that could diverge from the normative expected. So just be aware that the term neurodiversity and neurodivergent are different. Another thing that is important to mention is the history of the autism diagnosis. Autism was not a formal diagnosis until around the 1940s and 1950s with Kanner, Asperger, and Skinner. And these gentlemen really started to note the patterns in divergent development for autistic individuals. I'm not going to go into some of the darkness of that history, but just know, like anything that is quantified and created within the medical model of understanding is going to pathologize and the diagnosis. Sorry, my cat's coming to say hi. And so it's really just important to acknowledge that the understanding, the baseline understanding that we and many of us in the medical profession have taken comes from a very pathologized and medicalized understanding. They want to fix us. Another thing that's important to talk about is having spiky profiles versus functioning levels. We talked about that before with low functioning versus high functioning, and the how they're really unhelpful terms to describe the experience of being autistic. A lot of autistic people talk about having a spiky profile, which means there's some things that they can do really well. There's some things that they may need profound help in. And there's some things that on one day they might be able to do really well when they're supported, when their sensory systems are engaged and regulated. But on a low spoons day or when things are difficult, they're literally physiologically and neurologically not able to do them. So one day they can, one day they can't. That's not a value judgment. That's just simply saying, this day I can, this day I can't. And so we have that experience, and that can be frustrating to communicate at an occupational level, because there is the neuronormative expectation that once you can do something, check mark, discharge from therapy, you can do it. But that's not really the experience of autistic people. And interestingly, in the 1990s, this phrase was first used by disability rights activists, but nothing about us without us. And when we talk about the impact of creating developmental supports and measures without the input of actual autistic people, we can see the legacy of unintentional/intentional harm that has been perpetuated by helpers, those in the helping profession. And so just be very clear with yourself that a lot of the older research was done without autistic perspectives involved, and therefore does not include autistic-led goals, doesn't include autistic perspectives, certainly doesn't embrace neurodiversity as a valid way of being. And the autistic culture is clear that we are a valid way of being. As autistic people, we have our own developmental trajectory. Do we know a lot about that yet? No, we don't, because all the way up into including now, many compliance-based therapies and even occupational therapy can be compliance-based. And we focus on taking an autistic being and having them turned into a neuronormative or typically developing being. When we as autistics, because we have our own occupations and our own ways of being, we develop differently. Sensory differences, again, huge. I like to really kind of point out that if my sensory experiences and in what I've noticed in my community at baseline, our baseline is 2 standard deviations outside the norm, meaning that what a neurotypical person experiences at a sensory level at baseline, how I'm supposed to experience things 2 deviations outside of the norm. And so really understanding the magnitude of sensory experiences and how my body is going to process them is important. And communication differences. What's really cool about the literature that's coming out, and some of the stuff that I'm actually going to focus in about, is that our communication and the way that we communicate occupation, our understanding of occupation, how to do an occupation, how to support an occupation, comes from a very this neuronormative perspective. And so all of the literature and all of the materials have been presented and collaborated from that perspective. But what we are finding out, first, it was actually 2012, Damian Milton came out with a really amazing article about double empathy, which means that we're finding that the truth is, if an autistic person talks to another autistic person, we understand each other fine. When a neurotypical person talks to another neurotypical person, they understand each other fine. It's where the intersection, and when we talk to each other, that we have more of those difficulties. But that does not mean the ways that an autistic person communicates is wrong. And putting focus on autistic people learning to communicate neurotypically so that they can communicate with neurotypicals places a oh my goodness, word, a pedestal of supremacy under neurotypical and oral communication. And why this is like, so this is back in, here we are in the 2010s, now we're in the 2020s. Why this is huge is that we're realizing that autistic people communicate to each other really well, and we do it differently. And it's because many autistic people are what's known as Gestalt language processors. Gestalt language processors are people who process early language in strings of sound or chunks rather than processing single words. This includes echolalia, scripting, and stimming. So the ways that we are communicating and supporting the engagement in occupation have been based on analytical language processors, which has its own sequence and series and ways to support. We have not been taught any of that in Gestalt language processing and how to really support. But autistics are figuring it out. And we are communicating that with the rest of the world. And I thank you all for being here because you are literally a part of that change. And recognizing that echolalia, scripting, and stimming is part of communication. And it is essential to have that part of communication to communicate our occupation. So how is stimming an autistic occupation? So if we look at the DSM-5, stimming refers to repetitive body movements, movements of objects, and other repetitive and restricted behavior. Usually when we talk about stimming, there is a very negative focus on stimming. And I want to take a moment and say that the number one question that I get during this lecture is, what about self-induced behavior? And things like stimming, hitting your head over and over again in a way that's harmful, etc. And I want to acknowledge that that we do have self-induced behavior at times when things are dysregulating. There's a lot of literature that helps to understand why people are using those behaviors or why they may need them in the moment. And so we really shouldn't pathologize the behavior at all. But, oh my goodness. Oh my words. Oh, we have to expand our language and expand our understanding of stimming. Because again, when we go back to, well, what does it mean to be neurodiversity affirming? If the only thing that we are talking about with stimming is self-induced behaviors and the negative parts of stimming, we are actively contributing to the systemic bias that pathologizes stimming and removes it as a valid autistic occupation, because we create goals and systems to suppress stimming. And so, yes, it's really important to talk about those times when stimming could be harmful, but that is a slender thread in a majestic tapestry of stimming. And so I'm going to focus this presentation on expanding our understanding of stimming. The best way to find out what the autistic population thinks about stimming is to go to the autistic people themselves. I don't think about it. I don't do it on purpose. It isn't a behavior. It happens naturally. It helps me stay organized, or it helps me organize my thoughts and stay on task. Stimming is the opposite of a distraction. One of the things that I found really interesting in talking to other autistic people about stimming, stimming myself, which is I am a free stim, pro stim person, and also reading about stimming in the literature. People describe the sensation of stimming almost as if it starts off as an unconscious process that fades into consciousness. And what I find helpful for myself and for the clients that I support is when somebody becomes aware of their stimming, a good question to ask is what's next? When I notice that I am stimming, or when a friend or somebody that I'm supporting is starting to stim, that could be at a completely unconscious level. And the moment that you become or conscious of it, it's an opportunity to do a check-in with yourself. What do I need? Something? Is everything? I'm doing this because I'm happy? Well, then continue, move forward. Or is something dysregulating me and I need to take care of a sensory need, or I need to get a drink or take a walk? But people will say, ask if stimming is unconscious or conscious. And to that, I say yes. But what I do know is that it's incredibly important, and it's the opposite of distraction. Stimming is a clue, a cue, and an investigation. Stimming is neurologically necessary for engagement within and outside of my body. Stimming is creating and conducting a sensory symphony. I love that. I love the idea of the interactive, complex processes that are occurring when we are doing something seemingly as simple as flicking beads back and forth. There's so much that could be happening. There's so much that could be communicated, and we don't understand. Why don't we understand? Because we haven't expanded our understanding of stimming. We only have this one really narrow focus of what stimming is. So let's talk a little bit about the research and what the research currently says about stimming. Again, with the recognition that the early understanding of autism was done from a bias standpoint. It was understood as it impacted little white boys, and very privileged, in very privileged areas. And so there wasn't really a full comprehension of all of the aspects of autism. And so over the decades, we've really started to understand more. And now that, like, for example, speech has come forward and said, you know what, wow, holy moly, we've been getting it wrong this whole time. We have been supporting our learners as analytic processors when autistic people often use gestalt processing. As occupational therapists, we're coming in and saying, holy moly, like, look at this. There are actual autistic occupations that are important to support. They are important to learn about. They are important to facilitate. They are important to protect. And we haven't been doing that at all. We, as a community, have begun to hold ourselves accountable and change the research and really highlight the importance of neurodiversity affirming practices. One of the studies that I found, Grunsman and Roser from 2022, beautiful study on autistic people, primarily focused on non-speaking autistics and stimming. But they stated that stimming is an autistic form of bodily expressivity that can play an important role in empathic communicative exchanges between autistic persons and neurotypical. And they further suggested that stimming is a native language for autistic people. And as an autistic person, I can say that stops me every time I think about it. The idea that I am relearning my first language as I reclaim the stim, or the need to stim, as an adult, and how different would my life, would my communication, would my participation in occupation be had I access and support to my first language. Holy moly. Stimming empowers individual and collective cultural identity. When the literature is clear that occupation includes belonging, and one way to support belonging is the collective cultural identities. And I will tell you, as an autistic person, when I'm out and I see somebody stimming, I'm like, heck yeah. It's the happiest thing in the whole world to me to see another person stimming. I know what they're doing. It makes me curious, like, okay, like, do they need support? What are they saying? What's going on? But I cannot understate my joy when I see other people stim. Stimming fosters autistic friendships and enhances communication. That's from a 2010 study from Nancy Bagatelle, who professor at UNC, or I think the director of the OT department at UNC. But yes, all of my neurodivergent friends, we stim together, and it's just such a joyful experience. And it is such a vital experience when, when stimming is communicating some type of dysregulation. I am a better friend. I am a better wife. I am a better mother because I accept stimming as occupation and communication. And then CAP in 2019 stated that stimming is an adaptive mechanism. And this particular study that CAP did in 2019 was a study that focused on autistic adults and their perspectives of stimming and their experience in the occupation of stimming, that as they've begun to reclaim. And as an OT, as a mom, as a person, an autistic person, just in general, I just cannot figure out what my life would be like, what the quality of my occupational engagement had I always been allowed to stim or to use other autistic ways of being. And what we know about autistic adults is, number one, the life expectancy of the autistic adult, or of an autistic adult, is now down to 37.5, largely because of suicide. Suicide is the number one cause of death for autistic people, followed by heart conditions. And I feel sad for autistic adults who are having to reclaim these in the long and lengthy list of co-occurring morbidities. So like anxiety, obesity, et cetera, so on and so forth, that we just never had to have if we were able to engage in autistic being. And the reason why this research and this conversation is so important is that we have an opportunity now to stop and to refocus on population needs so that autistic children today live to be 100 million years old. 37.5 is unacceptable. The research continues to come. This article is a new one that has open access from Occupational Science about why it's imperative for occupational practitioners and other people who are supporting those autistic individuals, why it's important that we stop now and we start fostering more inclusive behaviors. So this last sentence really took me. I argue these steps are ethically imperative as the evidence on the harms of normalization accumulates. We already know it's a problem. We already know that we didn't know and we're still finding out. And the more that we perpetuate things that we know are harmful, the more harm accumulates. We just have to stop. This is another wonderful is a thesis actually. Stimming expresses empathy, and it's not to be masked or persecuted. But what I really liked about this article, and these are two articles that I'm going to share with you. It proposed the understanding of stimming as an autistic language that can be both understood and taught to other people, which I thought it's another beautiful new research that's coming out. So we're all on the same page. I'm just going to take a peek at the time. We're doing good in time. So what are some examples of stims? Stimming, again, we acknowledge that there can be self-injurious stims, but there's so many, it's almost like there's no way to list all the things that you can do to stim. So stimming, like visual stims, can be flicking your fingers and looking at the movements, the cadence in the corner of your eye, or disrupting any like noxious visual stimulation, looking through kaleidoscopes or anything that has a really interesting pattern that can help to anchor. Putting your face close to the fan. When I was a little girl, I would be the like, Luke, you are my father, with the rotating, oscillating fan. But there's something, especially with the rotation and it's intoxicating, the predictability and the pattern, and fans are great too. Some auditory stims can include playing the same song over and over and over again. That is one of my favorite. When I was like a little girl, no higher than your knee, 5 years old, my parents and I drove from Texas to Connecticut in like the 80s. And I had a little tape player, and I would play the same song over and over. So I'd play it, and then I'd have to flip the tape over and fast forward, because that was I couldn't rewind it. I only had a fast forward button, and then I would have to flip it again and play the same song over and over. And this was before headphones were a thing, really. So yeah, my parents, Texas to Connecticut, same song. Bless them. Humming is another great stim. Vocalizations like moaning, grunting, meowing. Who decided that it was socially inappropriate to meow? I want to talk to them, because it's really a valid way of communicating. I have my goddaughter and I growl at each other, and we have it's stimming, it's joyful, and I know exactly what she means. We have wonderful communication through the stim of meowing. Hitting the same word over and over on your AAC device could be a stim. We had a friend who used to stim with the same 7 seconds of Let It Go on a YouTube clip over and over. So kind of ironic, because we did not let it go. But I got 7 seconds of that is embedded in my brain. Some olfactory stims. So smell associated, rubbing your face on books. I don't know about y'all, but there is nothing more thrilling to me than the smell of a library. I love it. Some people don't like it. Some people really do. Rubbing your nose against your hand. You'll see me do that a lot. You'll see I have scents that I put on my hands so that I can smell them often. Ripping leaves apart, the smell of broken leaves, that fresh smell, amazing. Some more examples of stim: tactile, rubbing your hands up and down on objects, flicking your zippers, rubbing your fingertips together, could be tactile stims. Some examples of vestibular stims, so movements. Vestibular is referring to the way your body's moving in space. So a stim could be spinning round and round and round. It can be hanging upside down. I know that many autistic children watch TV hanging upside down over on their couch and are usually kicking their feet on the head pillows of the couch. Stim, stim, stimmy, super fun. Pacing back and forth. My husband's a pacer when he talks on the phone. That's stimming. The act of pacing helps him to engage in the occupation of talking on the phone. Some proprioceptive stims. Proprioception is the feeling that we get in the joints of our body, the pressure. And it can include things like bouncing on a trampoline, rocking your body back and forth, tipping your chair back and forth. And I put this one as like kind of cheeky. So tipping your chair back and forth. If you are somebody who right now works in the school system, I promise you, in your head, you're thinking, 4 on the floor. And this is why it's important to talk about stimming in an expansive way, because we can look at what a child is doing and looking at them tipping their chair back and forth or doing those type of things and say, all right, you have a need that needs to be met. What are different ways? What are more ways that we can meet this need? Because yes, safety first. Yeah. What are some of my favorite stims? Well, braiding my hair is my number one favorite stim. When I was a little girl, all the way up, even to not so much now, but in class, I would separate this part of my hair and braid it, and then unbraid it and braid it again. And it was literally the only way that I could listen. It was the only way that I could understand. And it was the most effective way to help have me participate, is if I was just in the corner braiding and unbraiding my hair. Some of my stims that my favorite stim today of all day or of all times right now is vacuuming. That works out well for me because we have 3 pets. But I love the sound of a vacuum. I love the repetition of moving back and forth. I love the weight of the vacuum on my arms. It's really calming. And so I actively participate in vacuuming because it is a stim. And I like getting all the hair up. Finger wiggles are like probably my most obvious stim. The cool thing about being deaf is that I also use ASL and communicate with ASL. And so it actually, ASL serves as like a stim and a communication method. And I have a lot more acceptance around wiggling my fingers because people know I am deaf. Toe crunches, my favorite stims. So crunching, I really don't ever wear shoes. And so you will probably see like I have to wiggle my fingers on or wiggle my toes on the floor and really push into the floor. And those are ways, stims that help me to keep regulated and focused. What are some ways that you can support stimming? Again, some of these, like wherever you are on your journey of understanding the importance of the occupation of stimming, you can try any of these things, but it is morally imperative that we start to make the shift now. I think that we're at the point where it's just like, it's no longer ethical to focus and only stigmatize stimming and suppress stimming and say, okay, you can only have 2 minutes to do this stimming. We're learning that we're really missing the mark on that. So anything that you can do to help change this today is appreciated. Acknowledging stimming as it happens. This could be somebody else. It could be your own stimming. It could be stimming that you see on TV. I love pointing out stimmers on the television. So just acknowledging that what somebody is doing is stimming. Spending time daily to identify the ways that you love to stim and celebrating them. Being like, what, I'm so smart. I know what I need to do, and my body knows what it needs, and I know how to do it, and I can do it. And really, like, even just celebrating that like form of empowerment, but really shifting again, because stimming is highly stigmatized. And so we really need to shift the scales like massively toward ways that stimming can be celebrated. Creating and protecting those free STEM spaces. When I talked previously about sensory processing, one of the important features of the sensory processing model is talking about passive strategies to support engagement. And when you create spaces that are protected with the understanding that people can come and be vulnerable and be authentic and STEM as they need, it will help them to understand what stimming means to them and then support them to generalize it across contexts. They can take the things that they learn in those spaces and bring them to other spaces. But people are not going to be able to learn the full portfolio of stims that they can engage in if they never have a space to do it. And we can create that for them and protect it. Again, validating the importance of sensory information. I didn't cover it tonight, but a lot of the literature out there talks about the importance of stimming as a regulatory mechanism for sensory dysregulation. That is clear in the literature, and that it is a way to help regulate, and it's also a way to help communicate. And yeah, we're sensory beings, and autistic people, our sensory differences are a feature of our diagnosis. Validate community by participating in community. As somebody who is a social media advocate, I cannot tell you how important it is for you to participate in community and the ways that you can. If that's just social media, if that's just liking a post or sharing a post, thank you. Heck yeah, you're doing great. Like, that is so helpful. But even bringing it to your schools, or to, we're in the holiday season, whatever, happy holidays, whichever holiday you celebrate. But just bringing out, oh, like the joy of stimming out into the community is these are the things that we need to do to change the paradigm. And finally, the most difficult, theoretically, is calling in and educating people when they suppress stimming. This is hard to do, but we have to do it, because I don't think that ethically our field can continue to produce literature that shows us how harmful it is for autistic adults that we weren't able to stim, and work in spaces that actively suppress stimming. We have to stop, because now we have almost, it's not a pure longitudinal research, but we do have longitudinal data that is harmful. And so the more that you can advocate for your client, the more that you can advocate for yourself, the more that you can advocate for the populations of communities you serve, you are doing your ethical responsibility as a practitioner. And I just want to, it's your response. It might be uncomfortable, but it is our responsibility to do. Just keep stimming. Just keep stimming. Let me go back. Oh. Okay. How can we support stimming? I want to, so, wherever you are from, however, whatever populations you're working with, or if this is for you, or you're supporting somebody else, your child, your brother, your mother, and reclaim the STEM. One of my personal favorite go-to spots to learn anything and everything about autistic culture is Neuroclastic. And Neuroclastic on their website has this PDF for free. This is a story that's focused on Otto Crow. Otto Crow is, he's over there. There's 2 books out by my brother Otto, and then Otto Goes to a Birthday Party by Meg Raby. Meg is an autistic author, and does a wonderful job of creating a story in a place and space for this non-speaking autistic crow named Otto. And Trevor Bird, if you know who Trevor Bird is, created a lot of creative input for this. But this is an example of a story that you can read with other people. You can read it with a stimmer. You can read it with, so somebody who's stimming, you could read it in a classroom. You could read it on a train, on a plane, anywhere. And it really helps not only introduce what stimming is, but it also can give you like some ideas for interventions or supports or things that you can do to help playfully introduce stimming into an autistic person's life if they've never had it introduced that way before. So Stimming is Fun, a neuro-inclusive story about sensory harmony featuring Otto Crow. Again, thank you to Neuroclastic for all of their amazing resources. This is free. You can download this and use this wherever you are. Stimming is using your mind or body to help regulate your sensory systems by repeating certain actions or thoughts. Otto likes to stim by lining his toys up in fun visual and color patterns. Try lining up some toys and objects, I can't even see, around you to see if you like the stim. Otto also loves to stim by twirling with yellow pipe cleaners. He loves to catch the flashes of yellow. This is a visual stim because he sees the yellow. It's also a vestibular stim. Vestibular stimming looks like rocking, jumping, and spinning. Again, increasing vocabulary, increasing opportunities. Otto loves to get his vestibular stims on in the swing set. Heck yeah, Otto, me too. Otto also likes to cover and uncover his ears. This is a fun way to change the way we experience sounds. It's fun to experiment with sounds. If you put a big bucket or a metal bowl over your head and make noise, does the sound change? These are called auditory stims. Listening to a favorite song over and over can be a great way to enjoy auditory stims. It's fun to stim by escaping into your thoughts and imagining adventures. Mind stims are awesome. We can stim by tasting a favorite food or chewing gum. Otto likes the color yellow so much that he orders yellow food and drinks yellow drinks on his AAC device. What colors make you feel happy when you see them? Proprioception is the body's way of understanding where it is and how it is moving. For Otto, he stims with tight squeezes and pumping his legs on the swings. Otto loves to smush himself between his sister's stuffed animals and get tight bear hug squeezes from Dad. Whether you really love to smell flowers, watch colorful or sparkling lights, jump on trampolines, sing, dance, read, chew on a stim necklace, or twirl your hair, stimming is fun. Stimming helps us process our emotions and keep our sensory systems in harmony. I love that story. Again, just going back, again, there's so many opportunities to say, like, again, just expanding the vocabulary of what stimming is. Gives people an opportunity to engage in these skills and determine for themselves, self-determination, whether they like something or not, and then use it when they need to. That's self-advocacy. Stimming is normal. Stimming is communication. Stimming is adaptation. And stimming is neurodivergent brilliance. Shifting to a neurodiversity affirming paradigm supports the developmental trajectory of everybody, all human beings. Development requires opportunities, and we are tasked to create these spaces and protect the vulnerability of our learners as they grow. Thank you. That's the end. I'm gonna go out of screen share. Stop share. There we go. But I just want to say, yeah, so that was the presentation. Thank you all so much for attending. And I want to really focus in and say, like, what I hope that you take away from this is simply that the act of stimming is an actual autistic occupation, and it deserves to be supported. It deserves to be developed. It deserves to be understood as the important neurological brilliant occupation that it is. We deserve to have access to our language. We deserve to have access to understanding how to engage in our occupations. Again, if we as a society do not understand the importance of Gestalt language processing and stimming as a part of communication, how are we communicating to each other? So we're operating from a deficit, and that's not fair. It doesn't need to happen. And I'm just really appreciative of all of you who came tonight, because we are actively involved in the change and making a difference and pressing toward understanding what is autistic developmental trajectory and how we can support it. So yay. Okay, that's it. Yay. So I got it done on time. I'm super duper happy because I wanted to leave at least 15 minutes for questions, comments, concerns, chit chat. So thank you, everybody. Oh my gosh. I think so. There's a couple of people in the chat saying that they liked the presentation. Are there any questions or that I can answer? Yay, I'm glad that you liked it. You're welcome, you're welcome. Yay! Hey, Andy. Oh my goodness. Okay, so there is a question in the chat. Please keep, putting questions in, but I will take them as they come. Julie asks, is autistic play in young children essentially the same as stimming, or would you say that they are different? That's a great question. I say, as somebody, my specialty, well, not my specialty, like my joy is pediatrics. So I do look at development a lot, in supporting development and play skills. And so I think that stimming can be a type of autistic play, and therefore that just really supports our understanding of stimming as an occupation, because play is an occupation, and so therefore stimming is a valid form of play. So I think that you will see a lot of stimming represented in autistic play, and when you experience, or when a child is stimming, it could be so many different things. And just to acknowledge it for the beautiful, it's just, I words fail me. Stimming is just so cool. I don't know how to say it other than it's just freaking cool. And so just, like, it's almost like a vocabulary that we need to, start to expand and explore. So Emily asked, what does a free STEM space entail? That's a really good question. And I, again, go back to passive strategies. And so if I were to create a free STEM space, I would have a space that encourages people to acknowledge stimming, encourages people to engage in stimming, has education opportunities for other people to understand why stimming is important, especially like in the classroom, where sometimes people can say that stimming is disruptive. And that's another huge conversation, but I think that one of the important lessons that I've taken from Damian Milton is that especially with double empathy, is that it's also important to teach neuronormative or neurotypical people why stimming is important and why they should be accepting of people who need to stim and what they can do to help regulate themselves and maintain their own attention. A free STEM space could be like, for me, having the things available. Again, that's a passive strategy. So like having the stuff available to me in my environment so that I can stim. I have everything. This is the cutest thing. So it's a little cat, you can see it. And then you like pull it down. And it stands up, but it's on my crochet hooks. And I often will find a crochet hook and take it and fidget with it and stim. I think that but this is a free stim space for me because I am so far along in my stimming journey that, if I'm flapping my hands in here, my husband or my sons are not going to come in and yell at me. They know that I'm excited, and so instead of looking at me to correct my behavior, they will look at me to join in the fun. And so therefore that contributes to the overall experience of stimming, positive stimming, free stimming. Emily, I'm so sorry. It's just such a broad question. I think it really, really matters what the stimmer needs. What does the stimmer need, and how can we protect and keep that space for their vulnerability while they are evolving their stimming language in use of stimming? So, and thank you, you're welcome. Do I have any suggestions about supporting sensory needs in the school environment? That is yes, that is a really broad question. I love this question because it's something that I get to talk to a lot of different people about. And again, similar to stimming with sensory, it's almost like a continuum. I love Autism Level Up. And so I borrow their idea, like wherever you are, take the next step. So some of the things, like when I work with teachers in classrooms specifically, I come in with a lot of compassionate grace because teachers have not necessarily had the same education on supporting children and students with sensory needs that I have. And so some of the things that I may be telling them, they may be hearing for the first time. So just making sure that you have education opportunities first. You have people who are willing to be open about stimming, free stimming themselves, if that's you as an OT or a paraprofessional. Like I was a para for years. So, there's just ways to infuse it into the culture of the school, and thinking about that. And then also for sensory, I always find like my greatest successes were from doing the sensory profile on teachers and showing them how much their sensory matters, and how once they understood that they had a sensory threshold, and that if their sensory thresholds were not met, they were not able to engage. When their sensory thresholds were overwhelmed, they felt dysregulated. And when they really understood that from themselves, they were able to be more empathetic to their students. I I find, so another like really quick way of being supportive of sensory in the classroom is acknowledging again that the sensory exists. Like right now, I'm worried about all of you because that light is so bright. Um, and so, just checking in like, oh, that light's bright with me. How does that feel on your eyes? So just having, including questions and language that affirms that sensory matters. Those are like simple, like basic starting out approaches of how you can infuse sensory. And then of course it can go all the way, the range can include, providing sensory supports in the classroom, providing stimming, providing encouraging accommodations. I know my goddaughter, who is neurodivergent, just had a 504 meeting and was able to secure movement breaks for herself as a sensory break. So there have been more people who have been able to get sensory goals written and sensory accommodations into the class. And so that would be like the whole range in there. Stim and pediatric OT in a clinic. Yay. So, okay. Do you have any recommendations for working on other goals while supporting stimming and regulation? That's a great question. And so one of my favorite phrases that I like to put into goals when I'm writing to include is like using self-selected sensory strategies as needed. So whatever a child is doing, whatever we are working on, including that phrase gives me an opportunity to then infuse sensory into what I'm doing. So say I'm working on the ADL of tying shoes. Maybe we use echolalia, maybe we use humming to help focus, or maybe we, all the different sensory strategies that somebody could use to help regulate poor engagement. Making sure that they understand that the preparing for an activity, you can also use some of these things while engaged in the activity, and you also need to engage with things after an activity to help give you all of that regulation. And when we think of tasks and we think of occupations, we often leave off the critical prep and cleanup portion of an occupation. And I find in particular, those two areas of occupation are really sensory heavy, where we can really support people in their engagement and regulation with prep and cleanup of an occupation. So with what, like when you're doing handwriting, so what do you do before, what do you need after, and what do you need during engagement? So Julie is ready. Now that I'm going to actively encourage stimming in the young children I work with, do I have a good line? Yes. Well, they need to learn how to be normal in society. I don't, Julie, and I feel like I need to get one. One of the things, like when I'm talking about it, my favorite, like I always, it's neurologically necessary. That's the phrase that I often use to grab people's attention, to reframe what they are seeing, experiencing as not just behavior, like an external experience, but it also has an internal component, interoceptive component, and a neurological component. And so the more that you talk about why stimming is neurologically necessary, the more that conversation could expand. But I think that's a good workshop idea. We need to get a one-liner. But until we get that one-liner, my go-to phrase is saying that something's neurologically necessary, because it is. Ben, do you know if there's anything like STEM therapy for adults, teaching people to STEM who have historically had their STEM suppressed due to social norms and expectations? I don't, so let me pull that back. The spaces that I see it happening very naturally and beautifully are community OT settings. And so a lot of times when people are doing transitional work, transition to adulthood, or just doing community OT, whether it be people with different developmental disabilities, autism, mental health, OTs often will create groups to encourage that exploration, something that could easily be tailored into an individual session. But I find that the older people are, it's really helpful to have a stim or something modeled for you, or to watch, like just knowing about autistic learning styles too. Um, we are onlooker, like, so onlooker behaviors, et cetera, et cetera. We need to almost see something being done and see how the environment is going to respond to it before we may want to engage in it. And so having a more group-based reclamation style group where people are just trying things, do you like it? Do you not like it? Educating on different ways to STEM and why it's important. But yeah, so I would say where I see those groups specifically are mental health OTs and then community OT. I think there's a lot of opportunity for pediatrics to expand on this, of course. But some cool work out there. Emily, you're welcome. Yeah, sensory rooms are great. Oh yeah, set it up in a sensory, wherever you want to be. Sensory, when I worked inpatient mental health, I had a sensory room and we would shut the door, and I actually intentionally covered the window because people really just needed a quiet place with nobody watching them to stim and just to move their bodies. So Anna, do you have any suggestions helping people understand what a non-speaking young child stimming might be communicating? It's challenging sometimes for me to know they are communicating joy, or they need an adjustment to the environment. Yeah, this is a really hard one for me too. And especially as somebody who works, loves and supports so many non-speakers. Oh, that's a really interesting question. My goddaughters are non-speaking, and we understand their STEMs as communication, and it has opened up the ways that we can support them, and our just overall connection um, has been transformative now that we've really embraced, because I didn't always used to embrace stimming. 10 years ago, my stance was different because I didn't know better. Now I know better. Um, And so a lot of what I had to do first was unlearning my own internalized ableism toward non-speakers, because I definitely had the sense that of incompetence, which was not fair and not accurate and poor, like ableist. Um, and so yeah, like really just making that shift of understanding as people who are non-speaking are beautiful, perfect, competent human beings as they are, and enhancing the language and communication skills that they already have, like gestalt processing, like echolalia, and stimming is critical to communication. I could go on forever. You're very welcome, Mary Beth. Allison was responding to Anna that they use visual cards with yes, no, or thumbs up, thumbs down for different things in the room. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, like a yes, no, maybe so, not right now. Like so many different, but I love the yes, no thing because self-determination. Self-determination is something that we really should do a better job of supporting in autistic individuals. And it can be as simple as saying, yes, no. Julie, yes. I'm glad you like neurologically necessary. It's fun to say. Andy is saying such nice things about my sensory profile. I know we only have 1 more minute left, but Andy, I appreciate that. I do the sensory profile, a sensory profile report. If that's something that you're interested in learning more about, it is on my Ko-Fi. I'll make sure I'll send links to you. But yeah, understanding sensory and understanding stimming as part of sensory is transformative for autistic adults. Thank you for sharing that, Andy. And yes, okay. So there we go. It's 7:30. We're at the end. Andy, I do see you, so I can hang out. So I'm going to go ahead and start closing the room. But again, thank you all. Let me stop the recording. Let me stop the recording. Where's the recording? I don't know how to stop it. Oh my gosh. There it is.